Bit of reading some of the background papers that were sent to me earlier during the day. And I must say that one of the papers that I happened to read, which empirically demonstrates the impact of democratic decentralization that James Maynard talked about on outcomes in different areas of development, particularly health, water supply, sanitation, was striking. And I want to congratulate the authors of that paper. I was discussing with my colleague how we can take the results of that exercise forward, because what that paper does is look at it state-wise, analyze the degree of devolution of funds, functions and functionaries state-wise, and correlate state-level performance in some of these areas with the extent of devolution that has actually taken place. My comments are going to be born out of our experience that we've had in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which, as you know, is the single largest public works program of the Government of India, and also a program which has at its core objective implementation through Gram Panchayats. In fact, it's perhaps the only program which avowedly makes this a central goal of implementation. Of course, providing wage employment and creating community assets are also part of the objective. But I think one of the three most important objectives of the Rural Employment Guarantee Initiative has always been the strengthening of Gram Panchayats, and therefore the stipulation that at least 50% of the works should be planned and executed by Gram Panchayats. If you look at the average over the last 5 years, every Gram Panchayat in India has got on an average between 18 to 20 lakhs of rupees per year. It's not untied funds in the strict sense of the term, but it is funds meant for a shelf of works to be identified by the Gram Panchayats themselves and executed by the Gram Panchayats themselves. Now, I'm struck by the fact that our experience in Rural Employment Guarantee Program has been somewhat mixed. And some of the good success stories we have had on Rural Employment Guarantee Program are in areas where panchayats have actually not been encouraged. And this is a paradoxical position. And I don't mind sharing with you some examples of what I mean. Andhra Pradesh, which is a good example, which we always give as a best practice Narega state, is a terrible practice panchayat state. It's a state in which a lot of community assets have been created. It's a state in which there's been a lot of innovation in Narega, which has now proliferated across the country. And in fact, if you ask me which state in the last 5 years has demonstrated a single-minded commitment to wage employment and creation of community assets, I would say it's Andhra Pradesh. But it gets 0 out of 10 on the devolution and the strengthening of Gram Panchayats. In fact, they've accomplished what they've accomplished minus the Gram Panchayats. On the other hand, there are some states which have done extraordinarily well on the Gram Panchayat front, but which have performed disastrously when it comes to outcomes on asset creation. And the example of the state is the state to which my distinguished colleague belongs, in Kerala, where there's a lot of devolution to discover. So one of the things that I have been struck by, and Vijayanand and I have been discussing ways and means of bringing about a greater clarity in the design of the program, the implementation of the program, to make sure that one of the key objectives of the program, which was to use this to strengthen local self-government bodies, particularly the Gram Panchayats, is actually accomplished. We're not accomplishing that on a scale. We have a few isolated examples, as I mentioned to you. And I think it would, if we don't accomplish it, we are not doing full justice to the NREGA program itself. So one of the initiatives that we took a couple of months ago, and one of the conclusions that we drew from our experience, of course, was that political factors are important, the political climate, if it allows for decentralization or not, but much more important are the organization and management skills available at the Gram Panchayat level to actually prepare a shelf of projects and have them implemented properly. So what we did was somewhat innovative in the governmental context. We decided that 1% of all rural development funds would be parked with the Ministry of Panchayati Raj only for strengthening Gram Panchayat institutions. And 1% of 98,000 crores is a lot of money. Is 9,800 crores, so 980 crores in 1 year. And that immediately trebled the planned budget for the Ministry of Panchayati Raj. And I'm glad to inform you that I think this program has rolled out, and in some of the states this program has rolled out. Money is now flowing in to Gram Panchayats for capacity building, for recruiting staff, for putting in place systems which will enable them to be able to absorb development funds better. There's no point putting in a lot of money into these institutions if they don't have the necessary institutional infrastructure. So I expect the results of this initiative to become much more visible from 2014-15 onward. And I think you will begin to see some positive outcomes. The second thing that we did was we said that, look, one way of ensuring that these funds are actually going to be used creatively, productively, efficiently, is to build some degree of accountability in the manner in which these funds are used. Because accountability does impose a discipline on any organization at any level. So far, the audit of the NREGA funds had been restricted to at the block level and at the state level. So beginning 2013-14, on a random basis, we said we'll take 10% of all the Gram Panchayats in the highest spending NREGA district of each state, and we'll carry out compulsory audit of the funds that have been sent and which have been used for the Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, the results of this audit have been put in the public domain. They have been analyzed. And I have been struck by the fact that we have started this audit at the GP level has brought about a marked improvement in the accountability environment. And there is far greater care now being taken in the maintenance of records, for example, and in the selection of works, which is now genuinely done through a participative process in some parts of the country, rather than being at the discretion of the Sarpanch or the Sarpanch Pati, as the case may be in some states. So these are the two initiatives that we took in order to make sure that the key objective of the Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which is to make sure that the funds that we use are used not only to create wage employment, not only to create sustainable community assets, but also in the process to actually strengthen Gram Panchayat institutions, is fulfilled. We have made a beginning, and I think the next year, as I mentioned to you, will begin to show some results both on the audit side, the accountability factor, as well as on the side of ensuring that funds are being given, untied funds are given for capacity building. In fact, we have very soon, hopefully, next week, we will be launching another major initiative on providing untied funds from the Ministry of Rural Development directly to Gram Panchayats. Now, these are untied funds to be used by the Gram Panchayats in areas they determine to be priority. We are making a beginning in Jammu and Kashmir. after a long process of debate, I think we are reaching somewhere. And the idea is that to each of the 4,000 odd Gram Panchayats, the Ministry of Rural Development would provide some support, untied support for institution building and capacity building as deemed fit, not by us, but as deemed fit and appropriate by the Gram Panchayat, so that their capacity to implement rural development programs is enhanced. If we make a beginning with Jammu and Kashmir, we will then extend it to other parts of the country as well. But I'm hoping that next month, when is the meeting? The third. We will very soon, hopefully, we will be launching this initiative. I think the other point I wish to make is that the synergy between elected institutions, institutions of representation, and institutions of participation is still not yet been completely realized at either the policy level or at the field level. So there's a lot of investment and fascination and excitement, for example, on building women's self-help groups. But as standalone institutions, which are divorced from institutions that are of an elected nature. The only state actually which has integrated institutions of participation and institutions of representation is Kerala. And Kudumbashree is the only example today which I can think of which synergizes the advantages both of direct representation through election and participation through women's self-help groups. And in some areas, that synergy has actually led to very positive outcomes. We are trying now to replicate the Kudumbashree example. We're starting this in Bihar particularly, and a couple of other states. Also, we are trying to proliferate the success, and I hope that in the years to come, we will be able to put in place a system which draws upon the strength of the elected institutions as borne out by all the empirical analysis in your background papers, and also the advantages that accrue in terms of social mobilization from institutions like women's self-help groups, which in states like Andhra Pradesh particularly, to an extent now in Odisha, and certainly in a state like Bihar, have perhaps emerged as much more vibrant institutions than even the elected institutions. Now, why that has happened is a separate issue. But if you were to ask me, for example, in Bihar today, the women's self-help group movement is much stronger than the network of elected institutions. And this is something that is borne out even in the analysis that the NCAR paper that I read this morning. But I think in the long run, we would be doing a disservice to both institutions if we see them as vertical silos without really bringing them together. And I think we should learn from the Kerala model, the Kerala experience, and see how we can put in place systems in the states where these organizations have taken shape and have taken root. And as I mentioned to you today, going beyond the 4 South Indian states, we have states like Odisha, Bihar, Assam, Chhattisgarh, which are going to be the second generation of states in which the women's self-help group movement will begin to show a very large and vibrant presence. I think one of the the third issue that I would like to say is that so far as the Ministry of Rural Development is concerned, it's only the Rural Employment Guarantee Act that is central to this objective of strengthening panchayat institutions. Most other, in fact all other rural development programs are run either by line departments or by Zilla Parishads. They are not really oriented towards the Gram Panchayats. And of course, in none of our programs are block panchayats present. In fact, one of the biggest complaints when I travel across the country, I find a lot of support for rural development programs from Gram Panchayats. I find a lot of support from Zilla Parishads, particularly in states like Maharashtra and Gujarat, where Zilla Parishads have had a long history. But uniformly, criticism from the block panchayat level that they are squeezed out in the middle. panchayat level, that they are squeezed out in the middle by the Zilla Parishads on the one side, politically powerful Zilla Parishads on the one side, and now financially rich Gram Panchayats on the other. And the block Panchayat is sort of left hanging loose without anything to do. Having a constitutional mandate, but not really being recognized as institutions of service delivery, by the either the central government or the state government. So one of the third issue that we are grappling with really now is what are the other programs in rural development that in which we can make the panchayats very central. And one of the initiatives that I took in the previous portfolio that I had was to make sanitation, which was completely independent of the Panchayati Raj structure, central to the Panchayati Raj structure. In fact, now the entire Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan is anchored on the Gram Panchayat. The responsibility is taken by the Gram Panchayat. The funds flow is to the Gram Panchayat. The system of incentives is to the Gram Panchayat. And therefore, the system of accountability is also to that of the Gram Panchayats. So we are now talking of not just Nirmal Grams, but we are now talking of Nirmal Gram Panchayats. This beginning was made about 15 months ago, and in some states, particularly, I would say Sikkim, Kerala again, Maharashtra, Haryana. These are states which have really embraced this. And today, Haryana, I think almost 25% of the Gram Panchayats today are Nirmal Gram Panchayats. In Maharashtra also, roughly about 30%. Sikkim is all Nirmal Raj, and so is Kerala for that matter. So sanitation and water supply was one area in which we decided that we would change the paradigm completely, away from a line department and making the Gram Panchayat the focus. We were successful in sanitation. We were not so successful in water supply. Meenakshi Sundaram will know, even in a state like Karnataka, there has been a lot of resistance in the water supply area. But in the sanitation area, we were far more successful. I think the fact that the water supply department has many engineers and sanitation has more activists. That is maybe one of the reasons. The more professionals you have, the greater is the resistance to devolution. And that was my experience in the case of water supply. And certainly in the case of sanitation, we didn't find that backlash and we were able to succeed. But we are now looking at making our housing program much more centered on the Gram Panchayat. It is not today. It's completely independent of the Gram Panchayat. In some of the Maoist affected areas, we have made our rural roads program Panchayat centric. We have said that we will give the responsibility for awarding contracts to Gram Panchayats who will take on this responsibility. We have not had great success, but we have opened a window in the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana for involving of particularly the block panchayats and of course the Zilla panchayats as well. So, but I think this is an area that remains a black box, and we need to go beyond Narega. Although Narega remains the big bread and butter panchayat strengthening initiative of the Ministry of Rural Development, there are other things I think that we should be looking at, and we should consolidate on what we have started on sanitation, and certainly look at the rural housing program as one area which is crying out for this integration with panchayat institutions. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to see so many veterans of the Panchayati Raj movement, including the grandfather of them all, who is sitting at the back, my very senior colleague, Mr. Mani Shankaraya, Mr. Meenakshi Sundaram, Mr. Vijayanand, Deep Joshi, all of who have spent a lifetime in this area. And I can only say that we have tried, honestly, within the constraints that are imposed on us by the lukewarm attitude of many state governments. I've always been struck by the paradox that the states that demand the greatest autonomy in Vigyan Bhavan, in NDC meetings, are exactly those states which are not prepared to practice what they want from the center vis-a-vis the panchayat and the nagar palikas. The chief ministers who are the most vocal in demanding decentralization are the most niggardly in actually practicing what they preach within their state. So we have certain constraints. Of course, the biggest constraint is that we cannot follow a direct, however much we want to do, a government of India to GOI to GP minus the state. I think it has been talked about. We have often discussed about it, but the political economy just does not permit that to happen. And I think that is a constraint that is going to be imposed. But given that constraint, is it possible for us to devise some system of incentives? Disincentives don't work because we always find bypass surgery on some disincentive. But can we build in a system of incentives to ensure that the states have a vested interest in ensuring that the programs are actually designed and implemented by the Gram Panchayat, the Block Panchayat and the Zilla Parishad.